thank you for staying with us for our second conversation, and we're heating up. We have lecturers and teachers this morning with us, and we're critically going to look at the ICJ from an education standpoint. We have with us this morning Cesar Ross, who is a history lecturer at the University of Belize. And we also have Delmer Zib, who is a history lecturer at my alma mater, St. John's College. And we have Shari Smith, who's the economics and social studies teacher at SCA. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
All right. Apart from the fact that students might be very happy that you are here and not at school right now, we want to unpack the education campaign, because we've heard education campaign in a context which makes it almost seem that it's not a school sort of environment, which has the same principles of learning and the same challenges of getting people's attention and letting information sit. What is your assessment individually of what an education campaign ought to have been? And then we're going to move on to what it actually is in your opinion right now.
Remember, there is formal education and then there is informal education. And so all types of abbreviated speeches and presentations and workshops and things like that would be considered part of the informal process as such rather than the formal. And so there's been a short but heightened period during which the Belizean population has been bombarded with yes campaigns and no campaigns and neutral just the facts campaigns as such. So there's all of these ones from different perspectives as such.
Where are those ones? The ones that do facts one day?
I know I did some presentations which I made the public understand or my group understand. Whether you decide to vote yes or you decide to vote no, it's all up to you as such at the end of the day.
Yes.
So
what has the education campaign, what it ought to have been in terms of an ideal world, and you're sitting down as a consultant from SCA, they're sitting you down from the perspective of somebody who connects and interprets and develops young minds, young female minds, what it should have been?
Personally, I think that it was lacking in several areas. There should have been some explanation about procedures, reaching up to treaties, what is ratification, what are articles, what are chapters, because students don't understand that. And if the students don't understand that, then the regular person doesn't understand it either. Yeah. But we didn't start at the basics. We went straight into the treaties, and this is what it is, and this is what you should do. Mm-hmm. There was no explanation leading up to it.
Yeah. You know, we've joked around here that this is the ultimate cram session collectively.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because there's so much history to this issue. And oftentimes I think there is a drive to get all of the history included in the education campaign, which for any person can be overwhelming. So I wanna use that as a jumping point for my question, Delmer. Looking at, and I know all of you here are directly involved in student groups that have been talking about this issue. SCA had their own debate and referendum. And Delmer, I know you're actively involved with your history group there at SJC. When you see what is taking place in the landscape, do you think it was even possible for all this information to be covered in what was the intense campaign period of about 3 months?
Well, I would like to start off with the problem. And the problem is that we knew we are going to head to the ICJ at some point. Since 2000, 2005, both administrations knew that, and they did nothing about it. And I think that is a real issue, because history itself is so vast. There are so many perspectives, there are so many parts of accounts that make up this whole history that in 3 months it's very difficult to cram into the minds of Belizeans. And to me, the whole issue with this campaign is that, because the purpose is where it is lacking. Why? Because I attended many of the sessions to educate, but the central question was not answered in many instances, which is, why is Guatemala claiming us? A lot of the presentations started in 1859 with, this is our border, this is why we should go, this is the facts, this is what makes our case strong. But the regular Belizean doesn't know why. So if you are not clear as to how all of this came to be, you can't really understand. In fact, after coming out of the campaign, many of my friends were even more confused than when they entered that session. And the real reason is there, because there is no real idea of, let's educate them about everything that was going on. Rather, let's just jump into it.
Delmar, but I want to go back and kind of be cheeky to the education system.
Yes.
And I agree with you. The question of why has not been answered. There's been a lot of what, and a lot of, if you know the whats, you're going to say yes.
Yeah.
Or if you know the whats, you're going to say no. But it's a reflection of our education system.
Yeah.
We still have an education system that's still teaching only whats. This is a slavery system of just, you learn this, you don't know why 1 + 1 is 2. You don't know why 3 plus whatever is whatever. So how can we divorce what our education system is and the people who are produced by it to expect something different for the referendum?
Well, the issue is that if we don't start, then who will? And I think one of the central aspects of all of this campaign is that we've been using a lot of language that the majority of the population does not hear or does not understand. And the other thing is that the way we're presenting the information is flawed. And precisely, just yesterday, I was taking a look at some of the works of the CDS, and the CDS, I was critiquing them at the beginning as well. A lot of their information
Citizens
was
for the Defense of Sovereignty.
Yes, Citizens for the Defense of Sovereignty. And now I am not
Assad Schuman.
with Assad Schuman and his group. I am not part of them, and I am not campaigning on their behalf either.
Yeah.
But all I want to bring forward is the way they're presenting this.
Yeah.
To me, this is the way it should have been done from the beginning.
Their information has been very visually.
See, now they're turning this. And one of the things that is very important too is that the group is now being spearheaded by 2 young minds. You understand? And this is what, if I was a 14, 15-year-old, this is something that I would be reading instead of a book, because of the generational gaps. We're in a transitional phase.
But it even goes beyond that. And you use the example of a 14 and 15-year-old. Cesar, you're at university level.
Yeah.
This is not just an age thing. It's not about teenagers not wanting to read. It is a change in the way people think and take in information.
Exactly. And it goes back to what Mutata was saying, that in fact, we have conditioned them too much to just get the whats. Just get, this happened in 1954, right? So my question, and Delmar was one of my students, will remember that I always tell them, forget the date. Right? Tell me what is the significance for universal adult suffrage. Tell me what is why is discussing universal adult suffrage even important to us?
Yeah.
It's not because it happened in 1954. There's something to it.
But you bring in, I think, one of the most critical points, and that's one of the questions I have to you, all as educators, because you know from your own classrooms, there are people who just have a natural affinity for history. They love the story. They can mentally take themselves back into that time.
Yeah.
I'd venture to say it's the minority of your students. The rest, it's just, history, I have to read again, remember dates, all these things I don't understand why they happened. Who cares? And you just do it because you have to pass the class. So if we use that as a microcosm of what the general society is, did we perhaps go about this the wrong way in trying to give everybody an extended history lesson that they weren't required to pass?
I think it's the approach. To me, it's the approach. If you focus on the questions, because one of the central things that I monitored a lot social media to see what the Belizeans are saying, because that's a part of the history, that's a part of what is going on. That's a part of the reality of what is going on. And many of them had a lot of questions. And many of these questions were not being answered. So they're interested in particular aspects of the history. And as Mr. Ra said, that philosophy of teaching whereby we do not need to know the date, but we need to know the significance, is where our educational system should shift to. Because that is what attracts many of the students. They like the controversy. Yeah. They like the attractiveness of, look, let's discuss about this. Look, sir, I saw sugar, kayo is west and sugar is sweet, and yes, that is controversial to them. Let's discuss that. That is what they want to do. Yeah. You understand? And that is where you capture, it's a provocation that will
Yeah.
guide them
Yeah.
towards the information.
Yeah. And oftentimes internalizing information is guided by emotion, you know, whether it's I like this or don't like this. But tell me about the young ladies at SCA. They also had the hands-on experience of preparing for that debate and participating in the referendum.
They did, and the majority of the students were like, the most Belizeans, why do I need to know this? I can't vote. And if I vote, what difference does it make? It will still happen. So why is it important? They don't know why it's important. And even though we had yes, no, and the regular, it's not yes or no, they still didn't understand. What really got to them was the emotional part when the presenter said, oh, we can use it for education, we can use it for this, we can use it for that. So I think there had to be an emotional connection for it to make a difference. And that was not done.
You know, I want to go back to, because we're trying to unpack this from the standpoint, we had the opportunity of looking at it from the eye of an artist yesterday, and today we're looking at it from the eye of an educator, which I'm finding absolutely refreshing. One of the things about education is control.
Yes.
You have to sit in this classroom,
Yes.
and that's why I admire those people who are learning online. Because, I mean, you're at
It
home,
takes
and you watch
a
people
different
walk
will.
up and do, it's a different will. The attention span, which is a part of control. But for a public education campaign, it's hard because you don't have control. You don't have the whole of Belize sitting in a classroom that you can set your lesson plan. You start off with this space. So people get information in a different way. I get a lead piece, and I watch the thing, I see Mr. Zib, I watch Mr. Ross, and I get a next lead piece. But there's lack of coherence because information has to come together for you to learn properly. Imagine learning the alphabet, you learn A one spell, then you learn D the next time, then you learn Z, and then you have to put it together in order. What controls do you think could have been done? What lessons could we have taken from what somebody does in a little classroom to the national stage to allow for a little bit of control, that the education campaign would be a little bit more seamless and coherent?
But control itself is a colonial construct. One of the things that we needed to have done is to capture the things that are prominent in our society. What do I mean by that? Currently, we're starting to use a lot of songs, a lot of poems, a lot of imagery, cartoons. All of these things are being used in the classroom because it captures the attention. So what you want is for people to be attracted to it and say, oh, I am provoked by this. Let me just find out a little bit more about it. So it's not necessarily about the control aspect of it, but rather about the provocation. So what should have been done, and what I think can still be done, because the referendum is happening, but it doesn't erase the fact that this is still a big part of our history.
Yeah.
What needs to be done is identify a series of provocations, make it visibly attractive or auditory, that's something that attracts my attention. And as a Belizean, I'll be like, probably it's just a song, but maybe 1 week or 2 weeks after, I'll be thinking about how does this apply?
Yeah.
And that's the provocation.
How do you respond? How do you respond to the thought that if the process goes right, let's say there's a yes vote, that education then becomes a political issue because it is then taken out of our hands. It now goes into the hands of lawyers. It's no longer a public interest thing, save and except for the repercussions, political repercussions. But that lawyers now take it over. So really and truly, your education campaign is only 5 more days in a lifespan. How do you respond to that?
I kind of would beg to differ, because I think the fact that a lot of people are still not comfortable with what they know or what they don't know, that while the lawyers may take over the formal process, there will still be a lot of debate out there.
Yeah.
There will still be a lot of heightened discussion out there. And we cannot stop. We cannot stop the education. The referendum, once that is done, I think that gives us a pause to then do more of what we should have been doing. More of the provocation, more of the putting out information there. I think we should not stop that, right? And I think we should in fact formalize a process to do that, in which we begin to go back to why is it that Guatemala even thinks that they have hereditary rights to this place as such, right? Where does the fact that they claim they inherit is disconnected from the fact that they never exercise state function anywhere? So how can, because I up to last night, about 1 o'clock, actually this morning, there were still people online asking, so what are we taking and why do we have to go? If what you're saying about the treaty and all of these things here, why are we going? What is it that we're taking to court? And I'm still, and the bad part is, I am not as good as Trump in tweeting and I just am not. So trying to explain and in social media
But
sometimes is...
I mean, I feel like some of these questions have been answered. Or there's been, no, let me be clear. I feel that there have been attempts to answer these questions. But for some reason, either the information doesn't resonate or doesn't communicate clearly to people. Perhaps not the question of why there is the initial claim. We don't hear that as much in the presentations. But why we need to go to court. I mean, we've heard that answer so many times just on the show. I could only imagine others. So why do you think that the critical questions, people still feel like they're left unanswered?
I think we have to focus on the reach. How effectively have we reached out? Because a lot of us look at Open Your Eyes, but there's still a part of the population out there that don't get to see these programs, to get this information as such. When we go to villages and talk, and I full 2 classrooms. Right now I feel good when I have 100 people there, but 100 people out of 2,000-3,000 people in the village, you know, is not reaching. It's not reaching, and because of the compact nature of this process here, you know, there are some villages where the chairman took down our numbers and said we have to bring you back and bring you back and bring you back until, you know. But at the end of the day, time just is not there for us. So the reach is an important thing.
Sorry.
What I would agree with Mr. Sib, that education still needs to continue. It has to continue. This is something that is a national issue. It's something that we should be looking at and should have been looking back from way back when. Not because we say yes or we say no next week, Wednesday, should it stop?
Yes.
Because it's part of our history, and if you don't know your history, you don't know who you are. And that is what I think we have made that connect.
Yeah.
We're not in tune with our own history, so we don't know who we are.
But can I just ask, you know, I'll have to confess, I had my own history crash course in putting together, mapping the Guatemalan claim. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the time of the proposals and how so much of the conversation then is mirrored in today's date, even at SCA debate as well back then. But these aren't things that, even though they're recent history, are on the forefront of people's minds. So I want to ask you, from your own conversations with your students in your presentations, what are some of the turning points in helping them understand, whether it is pushing them towards a no vote, a yes vote, or I kind of get a clearer picture? What are some of the turning points in your own history lessons that you find students gravitate to?
Well, I think one of the central aspects is the idea of we were squatting. That realization of at the beginning we squatted. Like, for some reason we've been preaching so much one idea of this is ours and you know, nobody can take it away from us, that in reality when they begin to understand this whole thing, that in the colonial, and I must say it's the colonial system, we were squatting. That realization pushes them to see, okay, so what is it that made this transition from squatting to now having title to this land? To me, that is one of the biggest points, because, like, for instance, I held a whole cycle just on the Anglo-Spanish conventions and the treaties. And when you reach to that point, there's still a bit, okay, so if we go, we might lose this, or we might just end up with half of Belize. But then as the transition goes and you begin to discuss the other aspects of, for instance, one of the biggest gaps that I have noticed from this whole education campaign is, how did the territory develop from Sibun to the Sarstone? How did that process occur? Why did it occur? How did it happen? Those are things that we do not really discuss a lot. And the reality is that even though the British were given title way up to the Sibun, it was not necessarily a title that the Spanish were giving. The treaty specified no fortifications, which means you cannot necessarily occupy it. But then the reality as well is that they went down squatting, asking permission from the crown to recognize them. And this was a process that to them is something that exercises sovereignty. It's a different way of seeing how do I exercise control over a territory. And that is fascinating to them. Especially because what I like to do is connect it to the Maya. The Maya believe that sovereignty is through planting. So they would plant their crops and say, this is my land already. The British were going cutting logwood and say, this is my land already. But there was something going on at this point as well. The slaves, the Africans were now being liberated. So if they become liberated, they can grab land and not work for me. So I need to take the land and exercise control over this land. That was a key moment.
Wow. That is an interesting turning point.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about what you all have found in your classrooms?
Well, there's, to me, when we bring, one of the things that I expose my students to, rather than trying to give them conclusions, like I find that when they read, because one of the things that he was pointing out, the whole squatting and between Siboney and Sarstone, even our plenipotentiary in 1859,
What?
Charles Lennox White, the person, the ambassador who sent to negotiate, was questioning whether all the way to the Sarstone was a fair assessment of
Territory.
British territory as such, right? And he had his doubts, and some people have used those doubts to say, hey, see, you weren't entitled. But then when you bring forth his counterpart, Pedro de Aycinena's letter to his Congress, where he says, sorry, we're not entitled to anything between the Rio and to the Sarstone as such, because we never exercise any state function, we never. So when my students begin to see those questions and those presentations, it begins to become something to them. And so those things there, and when you are able to bring in, even when you talk about Manley Hudson and you read his whole paper as such, you begin to realize it changes the dynamics of what is.
Okay, for me, I teach first form, so it's a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is about making a connection, and I do that, and the other teachers do that through songs, through presentations, visuals. If it's not visual, they don't connect. So you give them dates, they don't connect. You tell them, okay, we want to make sure that Belize is ours, and these are the resources that are here. What these resources mean to us. And you put money forming in that, and they instantly get interested.
Yeah.
They get interested. Or you say, how would you feel not being able to own your own land? But the biggest question is always, if we go to ICJ and and Guatemala gains space of Belize, do we become Guatemalans or do we become refugees? And that's a continuous question for them.
Yeah, people continuously want an answer to just the what if. Even if it's improbable. I think it's just, what's plan B?
Difficult to answer.
Yeah.
Now, in assessing the classroom, there are different kinds of students, and I'm trying to use the classroom experience to the whole of Belize. I'm trying to see what we can extract from it here. You have different kinds of students. You have some students, as Mr. Bahar, who taught me math, would say, just no, I get it. I mean, there's just certain students that just won't get it, which is true in our wider society. There's some people, no matter how many dates, your style seems to be a provocative approach to provoke them, so even scandalous if you can, to get their attention. Yours seems to be a little more Socratic, and yours seems to be connecting. But all of them draw to a certain psychology of humans and what makes us absorb things. If we're scared, we absorb things. If we come to it ourselves, we absorb things. If we're emotionally connected to something, we absorb it. So there are different teaching styles. But my question is, when you look at who you're teaching to, who is the Belizean that you're teaching to? What is the most effective style for the ones who just know I get it? Don't be distracted by the intellectuals in your classroom, the smart one, they answer everything, I read everything.
Who know all the dates.
I was a teacher that caught me. I was behind the person who was the smartest guy in the class, going and following, and then there were the students in the middle who were, unmotivated, worrying about the home, from the job. What, in terms of the makeup of the Belizean student, the national Belizean student, if Belize was a student, would be most effective as the education campaign target and motivation?
I think the the key word here is being able to relate to them. Now, there are different styles of students, but like, let's say, for instance, I can explain something this way, but if I see you do not get it, then I have to break it down in a Creole.
Yeah.
And then if I have to say it in Spanish, I will speak to you in Spanish. And once you begin to lay it down in layman's term, we could say, then they begin to understand. For instance, I was just teaching about the Panama Canal. And if I teach about all the political aspects of it, it's nice. To some, they can get it quickly. But then I have to look on the ground and say, look, if you had this land and you're selling off this land, you're building a canal, and then you have to pay to pass through that, how does that make sense? How does that affect you? Those are things that they begin to relate to. It's relatable to them, and they begin to understand. Now, I am not saying we can get 100% like all the students getting it.
Yeah.
No,
But at least they're beginning to be provoked by it.
Yeah.
And in the test, sometimes they do not necessarily know the exact political aspects of it, but they can tell you, this is what, maybe if I was living in this neighborhood and I was selling off this canal, this is what occurred. They can relate more to that than to that, because this is very political, very economic. This is more to my real life. And that is where education needs to go to.
It's the humanness.
The humanness of it. We need to make it centered on the student and make the student be able to relate. So I am talking about the colonial system. Look at what is happening around you. You understand? Look at what is happening around you. Look at what is happening in your school too. When you walk to school, what do you see? These are all realities that were shaped by these systems. And that is what they can relate to.
You know, one of the things, as we start to round off the conversation here, I wanted to ensure that we include is looking at this moment, right now. And we've said it before, you know, this is history in the making. Some decades from now, some poor child will be cramming to remember May 8, 2019. We are making history, we collectively as Belizeans. How do you communicate that to your students as first-time voters? Some may be voters from your own high schools as well. And how do we collectively try to get this message out to the viewers as well, who are potential voters thinking, I'm so sick of it, or I don't know what to do?
Yeah. You know, one way that I connect what's going on now, leading up to May 8th, is I go back and I look at students and tell them, this is not the first time. If you look at the debates at the public meeting in 1796, 1797, when some were calling some stupid, stay in Spain, they come with 30 warships, and the other was saying unpatriotic, not stay and defend our territory. And then in the 70s, when we were talking about independence, and some of them are saying, we're not ready, you're stupid for becoming independent when we got this. We have had this type of fight, internal fight among ourselves before, right? And at the end of the day, to us, September 10th is a big event, historical. Independence Day is a big, but what was the story leading up to it? And the divides that occurred. So at some point in the future, as you said, May 8th will be a big event as such. And the point is that the same divides are going on and the same fights. And so this time, I tell my students, you all will be able to explain the emotion. You can relate to the emotion in 1797. You can relate to the emotion in 1970s, but you could relate to this emotion here. And how you felt about it or how disconnected you were.
Ms. Wedderburn used to tell us in third form at SJC, he was a history teacher, he said, one thing we learn from history is that we never learn from history. But in terms of, just bringing it to now, I'm curious to see, as educators, what has been effective and what has been completely not effective as an education tool that has been used by the education campaign or the educators in this process that you've seen so far? What has been effective and what you say, man, that now work?
Tell me.
Pamphlets, the long lectures, the continuous information. It's too much information in too short of a period. You break it down, this is what you need to know, this is the process. They identify with it, they take ownership of it, it makes a difference.
All right, closing thoughts, because we are out of time. What do the history and social studies educators want your new students now or viewers watching to know about this process 5 days before this historic referendum?
It's unfortunate that it took us halfway through the whole education process before we thought that we need to break down some of the language, right?
Well, at the end, actually.
At the end.
At the end.
At the end.
But that's one of the things that we have to do. We have to break down the language. We have to make it relevant. We have to make people understand. And so a lot of people have these ideas, maybe a little too theoretic, and the education process, and maybe this is a time to revisit the whole education process, because at every level students should have been getting this, right? And it shouldn't, so much people didn't know about the treaties, didn't know about at what point was Spain and Guatemala. When did it change from Spain to Guatemala, that we had this ongoing debate with as such?
Yeah.
There has to be proper education of educators so that educators can educate.
Powerful.
That's
a deep one.
a
deep one.
That one,
put that on
maybe
a
even a
t-shirt.
quote you just
I put that
know.
on a
But
t-shirt.
thank you for saying that so concisely. Delmar.
Well, I think we have to recognize that first, as an educator myself as well, we have failed Belize, because we had so many opportunities of teaching this, and now we want to cram it in 6 months, and it's a very difficult process. But more importantly, I am very excited, to be honest. I think this referendum is a celebration. It's a big feast. It's a civic celebration. And I'm excited for history too. Why? Because at many points I teach about history and about how it's very difficult to reach to a truth if there is an absolute truth. Why? Because there are so many realities, so many perspectives. And to these people, this is the reality of what they're living. And when we retell, or when we rewrite history, or when we write history, we tend to just go straight into the political. Like, for instance, all of these political, all of these liar opinions, all of those will be recorded properly. The people in the village, what do they think? What if it didn't even relate to them? What if they didn't even hear about this campaign or about this vote? The people in the city, what did they think? What did the supporters, the loyalists of the PUP, the loyalists of the UDP, what did they think? So this, to me, is a fascinating event, because it is a great opportunity for me to teach the students and to tell Belizeans, look, this is history. Look at so many the multiplicity of views. And at the end of the day, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, after this is done, you'll only see the liar opinions. You'll only see the newspaper articles. You'll only see whatever the prime minister, whatever the leader of the opposition
Maybe
did.
a news archive, yeah, that's it.
That's all you'll see.
Okay.
But take a look at this. We're living it. This is part of the perspective. This is my reality as a teacher, and that's why you're bringing me in here. Because you want to hear what I'm going through. You understand? And
You have
that's why
one
I'm
more point,
excited.
Hassan?
Yes, because actually, as Delmar is saying that, I realized that this might be the flame that ignites Belize and Belizean students, as you were saying, across, that it is imperative that history is not only in our schools, but at the University of Belize and a history department, and maybe this can wake up, because we have had diminishing interest in people wanting to study history, majoring in history as such, and so maybe this, provides exactly
A rebirth.
the UB and the history department.
This has been one of my favorite conversations in all our coverage so far. I really appreciate you coming in. We hope that the viewers perhaps have been a little bit more enlightened in even just understanding why they struggle with wanting to make the decision, how to make the decision. But thank you for coming in, and I feel a little bit better knowing that all of you were in the classroom as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we hear from first-time voters, and this time they're going to be looking at the campaign, so stay tuned.